The courtroom was cold, not just in temperature, but in a kind of way that made your skin feel like glass, thin, fragile, and moments from shattering. Dust floated through tired shafts of light slicing in from high, barred windows. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead like distant bees, and the benches, wooden and worn with the imprint of years of waiting, creaked beneath the weight of lives in limbo. A low cry cut through the silence. Not dramatic. Just aching. A baby, small and stiff with the kind of discomfort that doesn't come from hunger or pain, but from an atmosphere it can't understand but somehow feels in its bones. The mother held him close, her hands trembling not with cold, but with the kind of exhaustion that makes a body forget how to hold its own weight. Her lip was split. One eye was darkening. She didn't hide it. Not out of strength, but because she no longer had the energy to pretend. The baby kept crying. Softly. Relentlessly. The sound was unraveling. Everyone tried not to look. That was the etiquette of the place. Don't stare too long at someone else's wreckage. But near the back, on the second bench, a boy barely 10 sat with legs too short to touch the floor, a hand-me-down hoodie zipped all the way up as if it could hold him together. His name was Micah. His eyes were the kind that have seen too much too early, wide, quiet, and old in a way no child's eyes should be. He wasn't here for a verdict. He was here for a maybe. Maybe today his foster mom would want to keep him. Maybe today someone would call him theirs. Maybe today wouldn't end like all the others. But then he heard the baby. And that sound, it pulled something up from inside his chest, something that had been buried beneath too many. Just wait here. And we'll call you. Without a word, Micah reached into his backpack and pulled out the one thing he never let go of. A small, chipped toy car. Red once. Now dulled with scratches and memory. It had no battery, no flashy lights. But it rolled smooth, and the wheels still hummed if you pushed it just right. It had been his brother's. Before the fire. Before the night, the door wouldn't open, and the screams got swallowed by the smoke. Micah stood. Walked down the aisle, slow. No one noticed at first. Not the lawyers scrolling on their phones. Not the bailiff eyeing the clock. But when he stopped in front of the crying baby and gently, wordlessly, placed the car in the child's lap, something shifted. The baby's cries hiccuped into silence. He gripped the car with tiny fists and blinked, curious now, distracted. A soundless moment unfolded, like time had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. The mother looked up at Micah. She didn't speak. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Her face, bruised, open, undone, showed an emotion far more complicated than gratitude. It was recognition. Recognition of another soul living in the aftermath of something. Micah turned to walk back. The courtroom had stilled, holding its breath. And that's when Judge Callahan, stoic, iron-spined, with a voice usually hard enough to break glass, stood up. The robe looked heavier today. His gaze had locked onto Micah not with judgment, but with something like shock. Or revelation. "Stop," he said, voice cracked down the silence like a gavel. Micah froze. He turned, slow, confused. The judge stepped down from the bench, something he never did, and moved toward the boy. Step after deliberate step, as if walking through thick water. Every eye followed. "Where did you get that toy?" the judge asked, but not like an interrogation. Like a man chasing ghosts. Micah blinked. "It was my brother's," he said. Quiet. Honest. He died. A fire." The judge's face moved, just barely, but enough. Enough to show that some old wall inside him was breaking. "How old are you?" 10. The judge's breath caught. The room was no longer a courtroom. It was something older, rawer, more sacred. "What was your brother's name?" "Jonah." Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "My son's name was Jonah." The sentence hit like a distant thunderclap. Somewhere, a chair scraped. A paper fell. But all Micah saw was the judge's face, now pale and unmirred, like a man standing at the edge of something he'd spent years pretending wasn't there. The toy, the judge said, almost to himself, was red, scratched on the sides. One wheel squeaked. Micah nodded. That's this one. The judge took a step closer. Micah, he said, like tasting the name for the first time. Do you know who your mother was? Micah shook his head. She died. I never knew her. The judge sank slowly to one knee, eyes never leaving Micah's. His voice, when it came again, was broken glass and trembling dawn. She was my daughter. Micah didn't move. The room didn't breathe. Somewhere deep in the building, a phone rang and went unanswered. The judge reached out, but not to touch, just to be closer. I lost them both. Jonah and her. I thought they were gone. All these years. His voice cracked. I didn't know you existed. Something in Micah's face trembled. A dam barely held. His fingers twitched at his sides. You're saying you're... The judge nodded. You're a grandfather. A beat passed. Then another. And then, just as the baby began to softly babble at his new toy, the judge whispered, louder now, voice sure despite the tremor. My son. The words didn't feel like a title. They felt like a vow. The air in the room thickened. Like grief was transforming, alchemy in real time, into something closer to grace. And as Micah looked up into the eyes of the man who had once ruled courtrooms like kingdoms, but now knelt like a pilgrim, something began to bloom in his chest. Not joy. Not yet. But hope. The dangerous, impossible kind. The kind that made him want to believe, even if he didn't know how. Not yet. The courtroom was frozen in that moment, a strange stillness hanging in the air like a breath held too long. Micah's heart pounded in his chest, the sound echoing in his ears, drowning out everything else. He could feel the eyes on him, the heat of everyone's gaze pressing down on him, like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. His throat felt dry, like the air had thickened to tar, but the judge, his grandfather, the man whose name had haunted the edges of every social worker's report, was still on one knee, staring at him with those haunted eyes. The room seemed to stretch out, far beyond the confines of the worn walls. There was a sickening taste in the back of Micah's throat, the taste of something ancient, something that felt like betrayal, but also longing. He didn't know what to do with it. Didn't know how to let it make sense. The judge's words hummed like broken glass. My son. No, not the words themselves. It wasn't the words. It was the weight behind them. The history. The fact that his mother, his real mother, had been the judge's daughter. The one he'd lost. The one Micah had never known. The one who had vanished before he'd ever had the chance to ask her why she never came back. It burned, this realization. It twisted inside him like something sharp. The pain of knowing he had been abandoned, not just by a mother, but by a legacy. His bloodline, his name, his place in the world. It wasn't just the absence of his mother that he'd felt. It was the absence of any real identity at all. A ghost, a blank slate, tossed between foster homes like a discarded toy. Micah swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the toy car in his hand, the small, insignificant thing that had somehow tied him to a memory, to a life he'd never lived. But the heat in his chest didn't let up. It was building, that pressure inside him, pushing against his ribs, crawling up his throat like a scream trying to claw its way out. The judge rose slowly, as if realizing the enormity of the situation, but also afraid to make the next move. Micah, I know this is... The words trailed off, and he took a step back. He didn't know how to approach him. The distance between them, physically and emotionally, had widened in the blink of an eye. Micah's eyes flickered to the baby in his mother's arms. The child was quiet now, its small hands clutching the toy car, but it wasn't the baby that held his attention. It was the mother, her face a map of sorrow. She looked at him with a strange, unreadable expression, as though she was trying to make sense of him, of all this mess. A mess that had only just begun to unravel. Micah's heart twisted. The woman who had raised him, who had become a mother to him despite everything, was not his real mother. She was just another stranger in the long line of strangers. She hadn't wanted him. She'd wanted the paycheck. She had taken care of him, sure, but had never seen him. Never really seen him. And now, in the heat of this courtroom, he was faced with this man, this judge who was both stranger and family, offering a chance at a life he couldn't even begin to understand. But there was no softness in Micah. There was no hero's epiphany waiting for him. No warm embrace or promises of tomorrow. What he felt in that moment wasn't hope. It was fire. It was a need to break out, to tear through the walls that had kept him in place for too long. His hands were clenched into fists. His teeth ground together as he stared at the judge, his grandfather, who had just confessed that he had known nothing of his existence all these years. "You didn't want me," Micah said. His voice was steady, even though inside he felt like a storm. "None of you did. No one wanted me. You left me in the system. For what? To sit here and listen to you." He stopped himself, swallowing hard, unable to finish the sentence. He didn't have the words. What was the point in words when everything had already been decided before he even knew what was happening? The judge took a step forward, but Micah wasn't ready to listen. He wasn't ready to forgive. His voice rose, quieter now, but sharp. "What do you want from me?" The judge flinched. He didn't answer right away, and the silence between them felt like it stretched to infinity. He could feel the others in the room, leaning forward, waiting for something, anything, that might make sense of this mess. The lawyers were shifting in their seats, murmuring to one another, the bailiff checking his watch, all of them trying to figure out what this meant for the case at hand. The stakes were higher now. Much higher. "I want to make it right," the judge said, the words coming slowly. "I failed you, Micah. I failed your mother. I failed my own son. I was too proud, too wrapped up in this damn courtroom, too much of a fool to see what mattered. But I won't leave you in that system. I won't. You don't get to decide that," Micah shouted. His chest was heaving, and the heat inside him flared again, but this time it felt sharper. More dangerous. "You don't get to waltz in here and decide you're my family now. You didn't want me then, and you sure as hell don't want me now." The judge took a step back. His eyes were wide, almost pleading, but Micah couldn't stop. "I'm not your son. I'm not anyone's son. You don't just get to claim me like I'm some lost pet you found in the street." The room fell dead silent. It wasn't anger. It was something raw. Something too real to name. Micah's fists were trembling now, the heat building higher inside him, but he wasn't done. He wouldn't be. "You didn't want me. You still don't. All you want is to fix your own guilt, to make yourself feel better. But you can't fix what's already broken." The judge's face tightened, and for the first time, Micah saw something close to a crack in his armor. "You're wrong," he whispered. "I do want you." Micah shook his head. "No. You want me to want you. You want me to forgive you for all the years you left me there, for all the people who lied to me, who used me. But I'm not your damn redemption story." His voice dropped, cold now. "I'm not your second chance." The judge swallowed hard, but Micah didn't care. Not anymore. There was a wall inside him now, something hard, something he would never let anyone tear down again. Not his foster mother. Not the judge. Not anyone. And as the courtroom began to stir, murmurs rippling through the air, Micah knew that the fight for who he was, for what he would become, was only just beginning. The courtroom was empty now, save for the quiet hum of the lights and the scrape of chairs being pushed back into place. Micah stood by the doors, his hand resting against the cool metal, watching as the judge, his grandfather, talked with the lawyers, his voice low, the words inaudible but heavy with something that felt like guilt. Micah didn't want to hear it. Didn't need to. He had already made his decision. He wasn't going to wait around for someone else to make it for him. The weight of the day, of the realization that he wasn't just a foster child, that he wasn't just a name on a file, had started to settle into his bones. But it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a shift. Like a crack had opened, not just in his life, but in his chest. He didn't know where to put the pieces. It wasn't forgiveness that he felt, or even acceptance. It was something quieter. The baby's toy car, still in his pocket, felt heavier now, as if the simple weight of it had grown with time. He didn't know why he kept it. Maybe it was the last piece of something his mother had left behind. Maybe it was just the only thing that had made sense in a world that kept taking things from him. He was about to leave when he saw the judge standing by the doorway, watching him, his eyes tired but soft, something almost resigned in them. Micah didn't move. Didn't look at him. He wasn't ready to hear any more apologies, any more explanations. The silence between them was thick, something unspoken hanging in the air. The judge cleared his throat. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he said, his voice lower now, quieter, worn down. Micah didn't respond, just shifted his weight slightly, the soft creak of his shoes on the linoleum floor the only sound. The judge stepped forward, hesitant. I can't undo the past. But I can try to make it right, Micah." "I can, you can't," Micah interrupted. His voice was steady, like he was stating a fact, not an accusation. "You can't fix what's been done." There was a long pause, and for a second, Micah wondered if the man would push him, try to convince him again, try to pull him back into some version of family that wasn't real. But he didn't. Instead, the judge sighed, deep and long, like something in him had let go. "You're right," he said, his voice breaking on the last word. "I can't." Micah nodded. And that was it. There was nothing else to say. Nothing more to give. The judge stood there for a moment longer, his gaze steady, but Micah could feel the distance between them, like a line drawn in the sand, invisible but sharp. He wasn't ready to be this man's son. He wasn't ready to be anyone's son. Not yet. Not until he figured out who he was without them. Without the system. Without the lies. He turned and walked out of the courtroom without another word, not looking back. Outside, the sun was setting, the light casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. It wasn't the kind of sunset that made you feel warm inside. It was harsh, like the end of something that had been dragging its feet for too long. But it was still beautiful in its way. The sky was bruised with streaks of purple and orange, the fading light catching the edges of the buildings in gold. Micah walked slowly, hands shoved deep in his pockets, the weight of the toy car still heavy in his palm. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know if anything would ever make sense again. But he wasn't afraid of it. Not anymore. The streets were still crowded with people, rushing past him, absorbed in their own worlds. But for a moment, he felt something strange, a quiet strength. He wasn't the boy who had been abandoned. He wasn't the boy who had been tossed from one home to another, one judge to another. He was just Micah. And that was enough for now. He kept walking, his steps steady, the evening air cool against his skin. The world hadn't stopped. It kept moving, turning, but in that moment, it felt like Micah had found his place in it. Not at the front of the courtroom, not at the center of anyone else's story, but somewhere between the lines, between the forgotten and the saved. Somewhere where it wasn't about finding family. It was about finding himself. And as he walked into the fading light, there was no grand resolution. No triumphant moment where the past was erased. Just the quiet, the hum of the world around him, and the soft press of the toy car in his pocket, a weight he wasn't sure he'd ever be able to carry, but one he wasn't ready to put down. Not yet.